The Washington Post correspondent in Iran, Jason Rezaian, was arrested, pulled from his home, and placed in Iran's worst prison.
Jason has been imprisoned in Tehran for nothing more than writing about the hopes and the fears of the Iranian people. We will not rest until we bring him home to his family.
Breaking news on the American reporter, Jason Rezaian has been convicted.
The newsroom covered this as much as we could, the way that we would cover any other story. But we as an organization needed to speak up. Who else was going to speak up for Jason, if not us?
It was a Wednesday morning in the newsroom in July 2014. I'd walked out of our morning 9:30 meeting and was greeted halfway across the floor by a foreign desk administrator who had a worried look on her face. She said, "We've just gotten the call and Jason's been detained."
I found out about Jason being arrested the same way most everyone else here did. I read about it in the newspaper.
The first question is why? Why was Jason detained? There was nothing in what he'd written that could have raised alarm. There's kind of a script that we follow when this happens. You look in the file drawer and there's a piece of paper that says, in case of emergency, call X. In this case, X was Jason's brother, Ali Rezaian. What you don't do immediately is make a big public fuss.
Foreign correspondents can be detained for reasons that are mysterious or totally unwarranted, of course. Typically, in those instances, they get released within a short period of time. So our hope was that if we kind of played it cool and just sort of made inquiries, that this would resolve itself. We didn't know what the charges were. We had no idea who exactly had arrested him.
It wasn't until 24 hours that we issued a public statement. In some ways, Iran is a democracy with an elected president and a normal parliament and government. But Iran is really controlled by an unelected supreme leader and by powerful security forces, the most powerful of which is the Revolutionary Guard. That was the institution that held Jason, and that's an institution really accountable to no one except for the supreme leader. Evin Prison in Iran is notorious. What exactly happened in Evin, no one really knows, but it was a place that sort of had that sense of foreboding.
We were doing everything we could to get the message to both sides. We had greater access, of course, to the elected officials.
We occasionally would have the chance to talk with Javad Zarif, who is the foreign minister of Iran.
We weren't entirely clear whether the president and the foreign minister could exert pressure, even if they wanted to, and it wasn't clear to us that they did want to. And so it was very complicated.
Iran doesn't recognize dual citizenship officially, and because of that, when we inquired about Jason, Iran's response was, "He's an Iranian citizen, but out. He's one of ours."
Well, there's no established playbook for something like this. But we knew one thing, and that was that we had to keep Jason's plight in the forefront.
We just wanted to make ourselves a royal pain that they could not get away from this, that this would be an issue that would stick with them forever.
We struggled with when we ought to become advocates. It's not something that comes naturally. And Marty was really the leader in that, telling the newsroom that it was okay to be an advocate when the cause was the freedom of a fellow journalist.
I think that we owe that to the individuals and we owe that to our profession.
I reached out to the White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough. I remember sending him an email saying, "I won't ask you this often, but I need to meet with you immediately concerning the Washington Post journalist, Jason Rezaian." Dennis responded immediately. It was the first of a number of meetings we had at the White House. In the government, with so many things coming across the president's desk, we wanted to make sure that Jason Rezaian's release remained a top priority. When a foreign leader would come to the Washington Post or elsewhere in Washington, we would reach out to them. We'd brief them on Jason's situation and ask for their support in raising it with the Iranians at any opportunity they had. And I think that pressure was helpful in getting Jason eventually released.
We worked with an outside lawyer named Bob Kimmett.
Bob Kimmett had done this before and had worked on securing the release of a Newsweek reporter. Because he had prior experience, he did help set up a framework for us. We worked very closely with Ali, Jason's brother. He put his life on hold to do everything he could to get Jason out of Iran.
As Jason's boss, my job was to work as hard as I could to get him released. At the same time, we're a newspaper and we need to cover the story of Jason's arrest. What we did was for me to separate myself from that news coverage.
Doug, Fred, Marty, anyone who was involved in any of the talks or these efforts, they became a part of the story. They could have been news sources, but in fact, they would not tell me a lot of things. I would be doing reporting. We tried to pretty much stick with the facts and play it straight to cover it the way we would anyone. If there was any outrage to be expressed, that would come in statements from Marty or statements from Doug, but it would not come from reporters.
Normally we like to just stay in the journalistic mode and cover what's happening, but here we were in the center of the news. We as an organization needed to speak up. I mean, who else was going to speak up for Jason, if not us?
He's innocent. He's an accredited journalist.
I ask you to free my son, Jason Rezaian.
And he has now been detained in Evin prison for 315 days.
Tonight, Jason is in prison in Iran for the crime of practicing journalism.
His incarceration, his trial, the conditions of his imprisonment has been a disgraceful violation of human rights.
About 6 weeks after Jason had been detained, his wife Yegi was released, and we began to think that things were moving in the right direction. We hoped that Jason would be next, and not long after that, got real signals that this was going to be tied up with the nuclear negotiations.
Well, the United States has not had relations with Iran since the revolution and the taking of the American hostages at the embassy in 1979. And relations have just gone from bad to worse since then. We had been holding some of their money that the Shah had paid as a down payment, intending to purchase weapons from us. It was really only sort of in the last 2 years before the nuclear deal came about that they openly started having talks.
We all look forward to.
The nuclear negotiations were ongoing at the time, and it was our belief that Jason's detention had been sort of folded up into that, and that he was a chip that they were holding while they negotiated with the U.S. and other countries.
The trial would start, there would be like a day of trial, and then we'd hear nothing for 4 or 5 weeks, and then the second day of trial, and then a month, and then the third day of trial. And so part of the challenge was just even knowing what was going on. We thought that they were slow rolling the trial because of the Iran talks.
The State Department gave no indications that they were this closely tied together.
We knew that he wasn't going to get anything close to due process, as we understand that in the United States. And so that was very concerning to know that we could work as hard as we possibly could on a criminal defense, and at the end of the day, we didn't believe it was going to be a fair proceeding.
There was no transparency about what was happening here. There was no real due process. The Iranian government had not put forward any evidence that he had done anything wrong. It wasn't a trial, it was a farce.
At around 140 days, Jason was charged with espionage, and that raised immediate red flags for us.
It did seem to take away any possibility that he would be sort of released somewhat quickly and quietly.
As you well know, there are 4 Americans in Iran, 3 held on trumped-up charges according to your administration, and 1 whereabouts unknown. Can you tell the country, sir, why you are content with all the fanfare around this deal to leave the conscience of this nation and the strength of this nation unaccounted for in relation to these 4 Americans?
Major, that's nonsense. And you should know better. I've met with the families of some of those folks. Nobody's content.
We knew from talking to Ali and the family's decision to speak about his conditions that a few months in, he was not in good shape. We really did not know the full extent of the psychological abuse he had to go through, both he and Yegi, until months after they came back. Jason and his family, they jointly filed a federal lawsuit against Iran. In the sometimes dry language, they describe some of those conditions.
The real power in Iran is the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. There are a close group of people surrounding Khamenei, including Ali Larijani, the Speaker of Parliament. He was someone who, in some ways, was a shortcut to the inner sanctum.
Larijani was going to be speaking in New York.
And Marty and I made an effort to get to New York to see him. We were promised a meeting.
We saw that as an opportunity to discuss Jason's situation.
We were told, well, there's no need for a meeting, Mr. Barron.
And so we raised a strong protest.
The back and forth went on for a long time. Ultimately, the Iranians relented. We were able to make our case to the highest level Iranian official we'd been able to meet.
And within about 5-10 minutes, I think, it was indicated that we were done, and we left the room.
I was in a staff meeting, and about 5 minutes into it, I look at my phone and I've got an email from a State Department official saying, call me. This person says to me, Jason's going to be getting on a plane. He's going to be released. We need to get to Geneva. So I hung up the phone. I went looking for Doug. Didn't see him anywhere around. I sent him an email saying, where the hell are you? So that left Marty. And Marty was having the daily budget meeting. And I mouthed the words. I said, I need to talk to you now.
So I went out of that meeting. It looked like a matter of some urgency.
And I told him, Jason is going to be released. I'm going to Geneva tonight. I don't have any more details now, but it's imminent. And I had to pack and get to the airport.
Doug got on a plane. I got on a subsequent plane.
I went to the hotel and called the State Department official who was there. And the official said, okay, this is how it's going to play out. Secretary Kerry, Javad Zarif, and Federica Mogherini of the EU are going to sign the nuclear deal. Immediately after that, Secretary Kerry is going to sign papers that will lift all the U.S. sanctions against Iran. At about the same time, a plane will take off from Tehran. It will have Jason Yegi. They will be among 5 American citizens who will be flown out. At about the same time, the United States will be releasing 7 Iranians. As soon as the plane is out of Iranian airspace, we are going to reimpose sanctions for ballistic missiles testing. And we are going to settle a court suit in the international court. It involves payments from the Shah's era, a down payment he made on some weapons. And so we owe them $400 million of their money plus $1.3 billion in interest. And that's all going to happen over the span of about 3 hours. And I sat there like with my jaw open. I started thinking, what is going to be my lead? Oh my God, any one of these things is a huge story. And then I took a deep breath and I started thinking, it's over. It's almost over. Jason's going to be released. And I started getting all teary-eyed.
On the day of his release, things were complicated. We heard that the Revolutionary Guard and the elected government were at odds, and they were even playing games where the Revolutionary Guard were trying to foil this deal to embarrass the government.
Those last few hours were really unnerving. Yegi was missing. We didn't know what could possibly have happened.
We didn't know where they were, and the State Department wasn't sure where they were. The U.S. government was calling the Swiss. The hours sort of kept getting pushed back because they couldn't find Yegi.
There was pressure because this deal was coming together for the plane to depart.
And there were times when the question in the air was, should this plane leave, carrying Jason and the 2 others, and leave Yegi behind?
Jason made it clear he was not going to leave his wife in Tehran.
Jason Rezaian, Washington Post journalist, freed
Help
after
welcome
a year
home, I hope soon. Jason Rezaian, the
Welcome
Washington
home,
Post
Jason.
correspondent who has spent the last 18
Jason is free.
Jason is free.
We've achieved this historic progress through diplomacy, without resorting to another war in the Middle East. I want to also point out that by working with Iran on this nuclear deal, we were better able to address other issues. Several Americans, unjustly detained by Iran, are finally coming home. Jason Rezaian is coming home.
Probably a week or so after Jason got back, he came to the Post.
He walked in the building and it was a hero's welcome.
I think everyone was just on the verge of tears the whole time. And Jason stood up.
My Iranian interrogators told me that the Washington Post did not exist, that no one knew of my plight, and that the United States government would not lift a finger for my release. Today I'm here in this room with the very people who helped prove the Iranians wrong.
We want people to know that we're not going to leave you out there. If something happens to you as a journalist, we're going to be unrelenting into your back. And I can't say how proud I am of the job that the Washington Post newsroom did.
And Kerry got up and talking about the principle of leaving no man behind.
In the military, as you all know, and in other dangerous callings, the most sacred pledge that you can make is to never leave a buddy behind. Like most pledges, it's a lot easier to say than to do.
It was very bittersweet, I think, because there were Americans left behind.
In the end, I think press freedom lost in this case. Jason was released as part of a bargain. Iran got what it wanted in Jason being freed.
This is a very dangerous time for journalists. Some in the United States, but mostly overseas. Not even for Americans as much as for a lot of foreign reporters. And the only shield that we have is to speak up and to speak loudly.
It's a reminder that in most countries, there is no press freedom. I think it should cause us to really value what we have here in this country. If there's any lesson to be drawn from this terrible thing that happened to Jason and his wife, it's that these reporters are out in the field trying to be eyewitnesses on behalf of the American public, and at times their lives can be at risk.